Welcome everybody to Redemption Church. Again, our online service this morning. It's going to be a great morning. We have a chance to hear another one of those redemption stories. We'll have some music to sing along with. And then Pastor Nate will be bringing to us a message from Ruth chapter 3 in this ongoing series. And then invite you to stick around afterwards because we want to give you an update about what's happening with church planting and our association with the Church Planting Network Crossway Chapel. It's exciting to hear what God is doing, and so we want to bring that information to you as well. Have a great morning.
Christ is my reward and all of my devotion. And now there's nothing in this world that could ever satisfy. Through every trial, my soul will sing, no turning back. I've been set free. Oh, Christ is enough for me. Christ is enough for me. Everything I need is in you. Everything I need. Christ, my all in all, the joy of my salvation. And this hope will never fail. Heaven is our home. Through every storm, my soul will sing, Jesus is here. To God be the glory. Oh, Christ is enough for me. Christ is enough for me. Everything I need is in you. Everything I need. I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back. No turning back. I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back. No turning back. The cross before me, the world behind me. No turning back. No turning back. The cross before me, the world behind me. No turning back, no turning back. Christ is enough for me. Christ is enough for me. Everything I need is in you. Everything I need. I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back. No turning back. I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back. No turning back. I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back. No turning back. I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back. No turning back. Christ is enough for me. Christ is enough for me. Everything I need is in you. Everything I need. Christ is enough for me.
Hey, church family, we are going to continue to worship and listen to the testimony of Jamal, just a friend of mine who has had a very unique journey, but God is evident and working in his life. So let's hear from Jamal.
Well, my name is Jamal. Shoe size is 11. You really wanted to know that. See, before Christ, I probably just lived like most other people did. I grew up in a household that wasn't without God, but I didn't necessarily go to church with my mom a lot and stuff like that. My dad was out of the picture by the time I was, 3 or 4 years old, and I think there was always kind of faith and God things that were around and in our home and things like that. But I did go to church with my grandmother in a Pentecostal church. So services would start at 11, go to about 3:30 sometimes, you know what I mean? For a lot of my life, I knew a lot about God. I think I can look back and I can see, like I said, being involved in church. But it was when I was a senior in high school, and I was living here and had gotten into an argument with my mom, and she actually kicked me out. I went back to Chicago to live with my grandmother and my great-grandmother in the same house I lived in as a kid. This was my senior year, right? So mostly grew up here in Colorado. So I came home from school one day, and I remember I plopped down in my room and I said, "Why are you doing this to me?" I was a good kid, I got good grades, and all these things, and I just couldn't understand why. I think that senior year is the time when I would say I went from knowing about God to knowing God. It was when God kind of removed everything, and it was just kind of like me and him. And it's like, okay, you don't have your friends, you don't have all these familiarities and all these other things, and so now let's get serious about this. And at some point you come to that point where you do realize that maybe I am not doing X, Y, and Z, but I'm still doing A, B, and C, kind of thing, and I need to be, forgiven for this. And when it makes that transition of, I know what God is able to do, or what he has done for people in the past, to what I need Jesus to do for me. It becomes more that personal thing. So it's a constant need for the Savior to do his work. I think one of the things that probably most resonates with me is that idea of being redeemed. Kind of my life passage, I would say, is Psalm 27, particularly verse 10. David says, "When my father and mother forsake me, then the Lord will take me up." And being abandoned by my biological father, my mother wasn't very involved or in tune. And I really, as I got older and I saw God's hand in my life, that verse really became powerful for me, and saying I kind of in a sense was forsaken in a lot of ways, and God did take me up, God did redeem me. I look at that story in Ruth and seeing how Boaz, was this close kinsman of her mother-in-law that did redeem her in a similar way, seeing God kind of, redeem me, taking that brokenness and the loss of relationship and all those things, and being able to say, but I've got you, you know what I mean? You're mine, and I'm gonna, cover you with my blanket and be your God and be your Redeemer. And it's a beautiful story, and it's an ongoing story. It's beautiful to see in Ruth's case, but also that it's happening every day, that God is redeeming us, and he's still at work redeeming all the time, and it's still as beautiful today as it was back when it happened with Ruth.
Well, good morning, church family. My name is Nate, and I'm one of the pastors here. And if you were with us last week, we took a break from our series in the study of Ruth to really celebrate moms and just honor and cherish and look at what a huge role they play in our lives. And so it was so good to see and hear both from Matt and Cheryl. But this week we're going to pick right back up in our study through the book of Ruth. And so if you have your Bibles and your journals, go ahead and open up to Ruth chapter 3. As we've been making our way through this story, we have been talking a lot about how God is in the business of taking broken things and making them beautiful. And we've really, the past 3 weeks, looked at the brokenness in this story and how there's a real brokenness, a real hardship that our characters in the story of Ruth are going through, that there's been a political and economic crisis that has led to poor decision-making and suffering and pain and death and loss, and that then our characters, Naomi and Ruth, had to respond to that brokenness by deciding to leave their home and return in humility to the town of Bethlehem where Naomi was from. And in her decision, in their response, there were tough choices, and we've seen faith on display. We've seen the subtle hand of God sovereignly leading and moving. And then 2 weeks ago, as we were in Ruth chapter 2, we saw how God is in control of this story, and that Ruth found herself in this amazing encounter with our character Boaz, who is going to become even more of a figure that we're going to admire and look up to today. And we saw that Boaz cares for her, that he provided for her, that he wants to be her safety, that he wants to be her comforter, and that she can rest a little easy. And we're starting to see the beauty amidst the brokenness. And as our story wrapped up in Ruth chapter 2, we saw Ruth was working hard in his fields, that she was being able to provide for her and for her mother-in-law Naomi. And during this harvest season, she's going out and she's laboring and she's working. And then we're going to pick up this morning in Ruth chapter 3 as we look at beauty in faithful action this morning as we make our way through this chapter. We're going to see 5 things that faithful action requires. And so let's jump into our story. A few weeks has passed. The harvest season is over, and Naomi now is going to start a dialogue and a conversation with her daughter-in-law. So Ruth chapter 3, verse 1 says, "Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, 'My daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you?'" Naomi here is picking up really where she's been the whole entire time, from the moment they left Moab, when she realized that for Ruth to follow her, it was not going to be an easy road. It was not going to really have a whole lot of hope or beauty. From Naomi's perspective, she has been concerned with Ruth's rest, Ruth's well-being, Ruth's provision and protection, her security. And so Naomi here is saying, I am concerned, I'm burdened for you, Ruth, that you would find rest, that you would find security, that you would find a husband, somebody to care for you. And then she now recognizes in verse 2 this opportunity that is in front of them in light of Boaz's kindness, in light of his generosity. Verse 2 says, "Is not Boaz our relative, with whose young women you were? See, he's winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor." The harvest season's over. He's gathered his crops. He's getting things ready to sell and turn into food. And so he's going to be working hard into the night. There's this opportunity. They've seen each other. They had a great encounter. Boaz loved her. He protected her. He provided for her. He cherished her. But not much has happened over the last few weeks. And so Naomi is going to now encourage faithful action out of Ruth. And Ruth is going to prepare faithfully in verses 3 and 4. In response to this opportunity, Naomi encourages Ruth to do some things. And let's look at what she says. She says, "Wash, therefore, and anoint yourself, and put on your cloak, and go down to the threshing floor, but do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." Let's pause right there. There is a ton of stuff happening here as Naomi is encouraging Ruth to prepare faithfully for another encounter with Boaz. And I want to look at what she's telling her to prepare for. She says, wash, anoint yourself. She said, get clean and smell nice. She says, put on your cloak, get dressed, get covered up, and then make your way down to where Boaz is. We're going to take action here. You need to go to him. She says, don't make yourself known until he's eaten and drank. Wait until the right moment at the right time. Just watch from a distance, and when he lies down, observe where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down. This is where things get a little weird. And she says, and he will tell you what to do. Wait for his instruction. And we could dig deep into what's being told here, and commentators speculate all sorts of things, but here's what I want us to see. Naomi is encouraging Ruth to prepare herself to give herself to Boaz, to hold nothing back from him, and to make herself available to Boaz in every aspect. And Ruth is going to respond with faith and trust in Naomi, with faith and trust in Boaz. In verse 5, it says, she replied, all that you say, I will do. What Naomi has encouraged her to do is really to prepare herself like a bride for her wedding night, to be clean, to be presentable, to smell good, and to go and lay with this man. And we're going to see how Boaz responds, and his character is revealed in this circumstance. But what Naomi is doing, or what Naomi is asking Ruth to do, is risky. It requires a ton of faith and a ton of preparation and a ton of trust on behalf of Ruth that she can count on Naomi. And I want to pause here and just really admire Ruth's character and her discernment and her wisdom. As we've gotten to know her in our story more and more, I've been more and more impressed that she is a woman who knows when to heed wise counsel and when to push back. When she found out that Naomi was leaving Moab and going back to Bethlehem, she says, I'm going with you. I don't want to miss out on what God's doing. I'm going to follow. And along the journey, when Naomi says, you know what, it's not going to go well for you, go back home, Ruth is confident and wise, and she says, no, your God will be my God. Your people will be my people. I'm not going to leave you. She has wisdom and discernment on when to take wise counsel and when to stand firm. And so we can trust here that as she's preparing faithfully and she's following the counsel of Naomi, that Ruth trusts her. If we're going to be people who act faithfully, we need to prepare faithfully and heed wise counsel. And we see here that there's some wisdom in going and pursuing Boaz, but there's a lot of risk. What if she gets down there and she sneaks in the middle of the night and Boaz doesn't respond well? What if he's had too much to drink? What if he's had too much to eat? And rather than being for her, he does things to her. What if along the way, she's sneaking out in the middle of the night and something happens and she's attacked and men do things to her on the way to the threshing floor? It's a bit of a journey. She's got to make her way there as a young, pretty, smelling nice lady on the way. What if something happens to her? What if Boaz, being a noble man, a good Jewish man, we've seen his character, we've been impressed with Boaz thus far. What if he gets startled, he wakes up, and he's angry with her, and now her job is gone? What if he casts her out? Or even worse, what if there's a worse punishment for her for trying to potentially seduce him or ruin his character? What if other people see and start to slander and gossip? This is risky. It's dangerous. But what we see from Ruth's perspective and Naomi is it's worth the risk. She's going to prepare faithfully for another encounter with Boaz. And her preparation is going to lead, now in verse 7 through 9, to a bold petition. As in verse 6, we see she went down to the threshing floor. She did just as her mother-in-law commanded. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. She came softly and uncovered his feet and lay down. What we see in verse 6 and 7 here is not a picture of Boaz overindulging. The author, I think, makes it very clear that this is a good man who's had a good, hard day of work, and after a hard day of work enjoys good food, enjoys good wine, and lies down for a good night's sleep. It would be common in this time for him to stay with his food, to stay with his harvest, to protect it from thieves, to protect it from animals. And so it would be known that this would be where Boaz is. He's going to protect his crop. And she goes down, she waits for the right time. She goes in and does exactly as her counsel has encouraged her. She uncovers his feet, she lies down next to him, and now she's going to wait. And so Boaz is asleep. He's partially exposed, however we want to interpret that. And in verse 8, it says, at midnight, the man was startled. I think a cool breeze blew through his bed. He's uncovered a little bit. It kind of tickles him in a weird way. He turns over and there, behold, I love how the author here uses an exclamation point. A woman laid at his feet. For a moment, imagine you're sleeping, and in the middle of the night, you're startled, and there's somebody in your bed that's not supposed to be there. I have 4 children, and when my kids were a little bit younger, I feel like they were stealthy ninjas, and they would creep into our room. And if you've ever been dead to the world asleep, and then all of a sudden you feel that face right next to yours, and you hear those terrifyingly creepy whispered words of, hey, Daddy. It freaks you out, and you immediately spring into ninja mode. I'm going to punch and beat up whatever's in the room, and then you see it's your beautiful little girl, and oh, I can't do that. That's what Boaz is going through right here. She has startled him. She has scared him. He was not expecting somebody in his bed. So he asks the very logical question in verse 9, who are you? It's dark. It's midnight. He can't quite see. He was sleeping. He was comfortable. He'd had a good day. He'd had a hard day. He'd had a good dinner, and he was sleeping soundly. And he wants to know what in the world is going on. It would not have been uncommon for prostitutes to make their way to the threshing floors, as they knew men of influence with possibly some money in their pockets would be spending the night away from their families, and so they had the opportunity to solicit some business. And so I think there's a very real concern that, who is this? What's going on? Why are you here? Who's in my bed? Seems like a logical question. Let's look at her now, bold petition and response in verse 9. As she continues to act faithfully, she responds, I am Ruth, your servant. Throughout the story of Ruth, we have seen her identity time and time again tied to her being a foreigner, her being a Moabite. And here, she has a new identity. She doesn't view herself or identify herself as Ruth the Moabite. She identifies herself as a servant of Boaz. She is here and available for him. She says, spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer. After she identifies herself as his servant, she does a few things in the second half of verse 9. One, she restates his prayer over her from chapter 2, verse 12, where he prayed that the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings she would come to take refuge. She says, I want you to be the answer to that prayer. I want you to spread your wings over me and protect me and provide for me. I want God to answer that prayer through you, Boaz. Secondly, what we see here, if we understand the context and the culture, this is essentially a marriage proposal. Ruth has snuck into his bed in the middle of the night. She's lied down next to him, and now she's asked him to marry her, to be her covering, to be her provider, to be her protector. And then lastly, and possibly the most bold of all of this, is she says, you are a redeemer. She leans into his role, his character, and his responsibility. And I think it's important. I don't think she's questioning him here, but I think what she's saying is, I know who you are. You are one who can redeem me, who can provide and protect not just safety for me, not just a marriage for me, but for my mother-in-law, and restore the legacy of Elimelech and Mahlon and Chilion. There is hope and responsibility that I believe you can do, you and you alone can do, Boaz. You are my Redeemer. She leans into who she knows him to be. This is bold. This is daring. This is risky. This is faithful action, and it's beautiful. It's beautiful that she would go in to his bed and say, I want you. I'm here for you, and I believe you are the man that I know you to be, and you're going to help and provide not just for me, but for my family. She's risking so much. What if he doesn't respond kindly? What if he's offended? This is so countercultural. She is a young, poor, widow foreigner sneaking into his bed late at night to propose to him, a rich, older Jewish man, her boss. This is not acceptable. She's put it all out there. She's holding nothing back because she believes the best about Boaz. So let's look as she has petitioned boldly at Boaz as he's now going to process, hopefully, with her in verse 10 through 13. He said his response to her bold ask is, may you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. He starts out immediately letting her know he's not upset. He speaks a blessing over her. He calls her daughter. He speaks kindly and gently and lovingly to her. He says, you've made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you've not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. That word kindness, that's our word that we've seen throughout the story of Ruth. That's the word hesed. It is all the good, faithful characteristics and qualities of God, Yahweh, the faithful covenant God of Israel. He's saying, I see God in your actions. I see the good character of God in how you're behaving now more than I did earlier. If we remember from a couple of weeks ago in chapter 2, he spoke and said, I see the hesed, the good character of God in you by the fact that you left your home to stick by Naomi's side. He was so impressed by Ruth and the godly characteristics he saw in her a few weeks ago, and now he's saying, this is way better than that. You didn't just think about yourself. You could have went after a young, good-looking guy, rich or poor. You could have let your flesh or your desire for protection and money, but that's not how you're thinking. You're thinking about more than just yourself. You're thinking selflessly. You're thinking about Naomi. You're thinking about Elimelech and Mahlon and Chilion and the restoration and redemption of a legacy. He sees God in her, and he's blown away. And here we're going to see Boaz, I think, fall in love with Ruth all the more. He says, now, my daughter, do not fear. He moves from a blessing to a promise that you don't have to be afraid. I've got your back. If we go on in verse 11, he says, I will do for you all that you ask. There's been this reversal that has taken place. When Naomi encourages Ruth to make her way to the threshing floor, she encourages Ruth, do whatever Boaz asks. She presents herself as a servant. She asks him to be her husband. She asks and rests and presses into, you're my Redeemer. And now we see the master of the fields saying, Ruth, whatever you ask, I'm going to do. This is a beautiful relationship, and they're both willing to act faithfully towards one another. And what we see is he's just impressed by her character. He says, I will do all for you, all that you ask. All my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. Her character is well known. People understand that she works hard. She works faithfully. She's stuck by Naomi's side. She is a wise, discerning, worthy woman. And Boaz wants to be her Redeemer. He wants to be her husband. As I was thinking about this passage, I thought about the quote, one of my favorite movies, and if I need to give you my man card, you can get it from my wife. She's had it for 18 years now. But one of my favorite movies is the movie When Harry Met Sally. And towards the end of the movie, when they finally, after a roller coaster of emotion and their relationship has been all over the place, Harry comes to the point where he realizes he loves Sally. And he wants to be with her. And so he sprints across all of New York City. He finds the New Year's Eve party that she's at. He runs into and interrupts the party, and he finds her, and he professes his love for her. And it's just this big epic moment. And then he says this. He says, when you realize you want to spend the rest of your life with somebody, you want the rest of your life to start as soon as possible. That's what's happening here with Boaz. He's realizing, I want to spend the rest of my life with Ruth, whatever it takes. And I want that to start as soon as possible. But there's going to be a complication. In verse 12, it says, it is true, Boaz says, it is true that I'm a redeemer, yet there's a redeemer nearer than I. Not only do we see Boaz's character and integrity in that he wakes up to a clean, pretty, smelling good, presentable young woman in his bed, and he doesn't act lustfully or of the flesh. But now he realizes, I love her. I want her. I'm going to do whatever I can for her. I am a redeemer, but there's a right way to go about doing this. And I want to do this the right way. There's one closer, and if we remember from a few weeks ago, this process, this concept of redemption is a provision from the Old Testament law that protected widows and the family legacy, and there was great blessing but also great responsibility that went along with being a redeemer. And so he wants to take care of this the right way. His integrity, his character, as he's processing through all of this, he realizes we want to do this the right way. And then verse 13, I want to use kind of our sanctified imaginations for a second. As we read verse 13, I want us to put ourselves in Boaz's shoes and think about, this is the woman he loves. He wants to be her redeemer, yet there's this hurdle to redemption. He has to overcome something. And this is how I picture this verse in Boaz's mind and heart, how he probably said it. He says, just remain tonight, and in the morning, if he'll redeem you, good, that's fine, let him do it. But if he's not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, by God, I'm going to redeem you. Lie down until the morning. I see in this verse a wrestle within Boaz, that he knows what he wants, but there's something to overcome. And he's wrestling, and he's just frustrated. He just wants to be with her. And so he's kind of saying, just stay here, and I'm going to redeem you by God. If he will, that's fine. But no, as the Lord lives, I'm going to redeem you. I can't wait till the morning. We're going to figure this out. We're going to take care of this. I just get this wrestle, this sense of turmoil as he's processing through, how do I stay true to my character and pursue the one I love and I want to be with? That's what's going on, I believe, in Boaz's mind, in Boaz's heart. Before we move on to verse 14, I just for a moment want us to think about, what do you think the rest of that night was like? As we see that she lays down and they're going to wait until the morning to send her home, what do you think was going through Ruth's mind? There's so much hope and joy and beauty in that Boaz has promised he's going to act faithfully. She doesn't need to be afraid. And one way or another, everything about tomorrow, about her life, is going to be different tomorrow. I remember the night before my wedding, I lived at home with my parents until I married my wife and then moved out and moved in with her. And I remember going to bed the night before my wedding and laying in my room thinking, man, I've lived in this room, I lived with this family, and tomorrow I'm going to get up in front of friends and family and say some words, and then everything's going to be different. I'm going to live in a new place. I'm going to live with a new person. I'm going to have this new identity. I'm now going to be somebody's husband. And there was anticipation and excitement and joy, but also a little bit of fear, also a little bit of doubt. Would I be a good husband? Would this, what would it be like to be married? There was so much joy, but also so much uncertainty. And it was just kind of this whirlwind of an emotion the night before my wedding. I have to believe Ruth is struggling with a little bit of that as we just try to jump into the story. And remember, these are real people in real places at real times. And then I also wonder, what's going on with Boaz? This is a man who's processing, how do I get over this hump, this thing that's in the way of me redeeming the one that I want? What do I have to do? I don't know if you've ever done this or not, but I like to think that Boaz probably spent the rest of that night imagining the conversation that we'll look at next week. How was he going to convince this nearer redeemer to let him have his bride? How was he going to operate as a shrewd businessman? We'll really see the wisdom of Boaz next week. I think he's probably rehearsing and trying to come up with a process and a plan for the conversation the next day. And so the two of them, I don't think, get a whole lot of sleep as they're processing and excited and eager for what the Lord has for them. They want to act faithfully. They want to do this the right way. And so verse 14 says, she lay at his feet until the morning, but arose before one could recognize another. She gets up early. I personally don't think they've slept a whole lot. And now we're going to see that Boaz is going to provide abundantly. He said, let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. It sounds to me like he gave a command to his guys that are there with him that no one is to speak a word of what has just happened. They're not going to slander her character. He's going to provide protection, not just for her physically, but for her reputation. She's a worthy woman. The town is talking about how awesome Ruth is, and he doesn't want to see that ruined because she acted boldly and had big faith and trust in him. And so they wake up early, and he's going to send her home before the town can start to gossip and slander that, did you see Ruth? She went to the threshing floor last night. He's going to provide abundantly for her, not just physically, but also for her reputation. He said to her in verse 15, bring the garment you're wearing and hold it out. Her coat, bring me your coat and hold it out. She held it, and he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her. Then she went into the city. This is probably at the very least 20 to 30 pounds of food he gives to her to go back to Naomi with. He's not just provided protection for her reputation, but he wants to give over and above. And so he gives her a bunch of food. So she goes back to Naomi, not just with a great story, but with a great gift, with something to share with those around her. He is going to be the Redeemer they are hoping for. They can trust him and have a hope and a confidence that he's going to act faithfully. And so she returns home. He has provided abundantly. And verse 16, it says, when she came to her mother-in-law, Naomi said, how did you fare, my daughter? I have to believe Naomi probably didn't sleep a lot that night either, that she knew what was potentially being done to Ruth, that they had boldly and daringly put themselves out on a limb. They're trusting in the character of Boaz, but there was much risk. And so I don't think Naomi probably slept a whole lot either. I think another title for this sermon could have been Sleepless in Bethlehem. Like, I don't think anybody got a good night's sleep. And so she asks, how'd it go? And then this is what struck me probably the most in our story this week. The second half of verse 16. Then she, being Ruth, told her all that the man had done for her. If you highlight or underline or circle things in your Bible, I want you to circle that small little word, for. I think at several points in our story thus far, Ruth has had to be prepared as she's put herself in harm's way by going out and gleaning in the fields, by sneaking out into the threshing floor, by following Naomi from Moab to Bethlehem. I think she's had to be prepared for things to be done to her. But she comes home after a risky night where she has had much faith and much action. And her story is not, let me tell you what Boaz did to me, but rather, let me tell you what Boaz has done for me. That just struck me this week as we have been in the midst, culturally, in our world, in the midst of a hard season, a scary, uncertain time. I don't want us to think God is doing things to us. When things get tough, when there's brokenness and pain, I can fall into the temptation of believing, God, why are you doing this to me? And lose sight of the beautiful, faithful action of all that God has done for me. We don't serve a God who does things to us, but rather who left heaven to come to earth to do things for us, to go to the cross for us, to take our sin on himself for our freedom, to die the death we couldn't die, or to die the death we should have died for our salvation, to walk out of the tomb and conquer the grave for our ransom and our redemption. We do not have a God who brings pain to us, but rescues us and saves us and is incredibly and immensely for us. Let us not believe God does things to us, but rather worship and celebrate the God who does things for us. That's the story Ruth returns home with. That's the story she shares, is all that has been done for her. And then she gives a little insight into why she returned with all of this food. She says, "These 6 measures of barley he gave to me, for he said, you must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law." He wants to provide abundantly, not just for Ruth, but also for Naomi. And this is going to flip a switch in Naomi. If we've paid attention throughout the story, we've seen really since the beginning, since Elimelech was involved in our story, there has been this family pattern of grabbing hold and trying to control their situation and their circumstance. Even at the beginning of our story this morning, we've seen that Naomi is encouraging action from Ruth. Go, prepare yourself. Prepare, wash, smell good, go to the threshing floor. Do. And here, there's like this eye-opening moment in Naomi where she realizes Boaz can be trusted. He's the Redeemer they desperately need. And her response is, "Wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out. For the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today." As Naomi hears all that Boaz has done for Ruth, she makes the decision that they are going to persist patiently. They're going to wait on the character and action, the faithful action of Boaz. They're done. They're going to let their Redeemer work for them. They trust him. They're going to sit and allow him to do his work. And I think Naomi's a wiser older woman. I think she knows that Boaz is smitten with Ruth, that he loves her and he's going to make this happen, that he can't wait to marry Ruth, that he wants to be her protector and her provider, and he's going to overcome any obstacle to make that happen. And so this morning we have seen the beauty of faithful action. We've seen the beauty of Boaz, who's going to persist, and he's going to move and go and do whatever it takes to be able to redeem Ruth and Naomi and their legacy. And what I want us to do is I want us to step back now And a couple of weeks ago, we looked at the generosity and the care and the provision of Boaz, and we marveled at if he can love and provide and care for Ruth in that way, who's undeserving. Man, if we step back, as this is a snapshot this is a love story, but just a glimpse of a much bigger love story, how much more can we celebrate and stand in awe of Jesus, the far better Boaz, who loves and cherishes and cares for us? Today, I want us to take a step back and again look at Boaz and marvel at this man who recognizes, I'm the Redeemer, and I'm going to do whatever needs to be done to redeem them. Jesus left heaven to come to earth to overcome the sin obstacle that kept us from relationship with God the Father because he loves us. Boaz loves Ruth, and he's going to go to great lengths to win her, to be able to redeem her, and to do what he wants. Jesus went to great lengths because he loves you, because he loved me. Boaz doesn't need Ruth, he wants her. Jesus doesn't need us, he wants us. My hope and my prayer, church family, is that as we look at the beauty and the faithful action of Boaz, that would spur us on to look at the beauty and the faithful action of our Lord and King, Jesus, who lived the life we couldn't live, who died the death we should have died, so that he could save us because he's for us and not against us, because he wants us, not because he needs us. I want us to marvel at the faithful action of Jesus, and then let that spur us on to act faithfully, to look for ways to be prepared and ready for God to do things in our lives, to look for and ask boldly of our God and King, to not be afraid, but to be in an intimate relationship with him where we can say, Jesus, I want to see you do big things. I'm going to press into who you are and trust your character. Jesus, I want to process my decision making. I want to think through things, and I want to see your will and your ways move forward. And so this is not, I'm going to do what I want, and then when life gets hard, I'll run to you, but rather, how are we doing life with Jesus? Looking for ways to process our decisions prayerfully, on our faces, in our journals, in his word, looking for ways to process with him and let him be our help in times of trouble. How are we looking for ways that God has provided abundantly? How are we looking and celebrating that we serve a God who's for us? He doesn't do things to us. And then just like Ruth, she came home and shared, this is what Boaz has done for me. How are we looking for ways to say, this is what Jesus has done for me? He has provided abundantly. Let us share that good news, and then let us wait patiently, trusting that our Redeemer lives. He is working on our behalf. He will direct. He will act beautifully and faithfully. Just like at the end of our story here, we see Naomi get to this point where she says, our Redeemer is going to take care of it. Let us have full faith and confidence that our Redeemer is fighting for us. Let us marvel at the beauty of the faithful action of Jesus. As we sit in the story of Ruth and Boaz, let us fix our eyes forward to Jesus, the far better Boaz. And as we go on this week, let us look for opportunities to be faithful in our actions.
Hey, Redemption Church, Matt and Greg here. Just wanted to give you guys a quick update on where we are in the midst of church planting. One of the things that we've realized is that in the midst of this pandemic, God is still advancing his kingdom. People are still coming to Christ, and we are still seeking to plant churches, to reach people, and to make disciples. And so Many of you know we're a part of a church planting network called Crossway Chapel. There's 5 churches currently in northern Colorado. We're praying that we would have 10 additional churches over the next 10 years. And so we'd just invite you to continue to pray with us towards that end. But we as Redemption Church, as a part of our vision, our 2020 Kingdom Vision that we started 3 years ago, had one of the big goals and points on that we would be participating in or preparing to send out our very first church plant, and we're getting really, really close to that. We're participating in that maybe in a way we didn't anticipate, but God still has us very active in church planting and involved. And so I want Greg just to share with you a little bit about what we've been doing last weekend and this coming weekend, and how you can be praying for the church planting that's happening right now.
So you probably all remember that we have been asking you to pray about and even considering being a part of the Greeley church plant. Well, this team has really come together, the leadership team. There are 4 couples now committed to being a part of the pastoral team, and it's very exciting. And as a part of that process is what we call a boot camp. It's an intense training period in which the team comes together and begins to wrestle through many things like their mission, their vision, how they want to make disciples, what that's going to look like, their target audience, the location they're going to pursue, what are some of the needs, and how are you going to reach people in the city of Greeley, and all what that is going to look like.
Yeah, and so last Saturday we spent a 4-hour chunk, and this coming Sunday, today actually, this afternoon, we are going to be spending another 4 to 6 hour chunk just helping them navigate through that. And just for your information, so you can be praying, there's also church planting stirring in Sheridan, Wyoming, and Bozeman, Montana. So if you have connections to those areas or want to know more information about those church plants, please let us know as well. But we're just excited and anticipating God to continue to expand His kingdom as we seek to raise up and multiply leaders, to send people out to start new works, and just continue to be faithful to preach the gospel and to make disciples. And it's just a joy to participate with the Lord in these things. And we, again, just anticipate Him doing great things as we continue to seek Him. So that's our update for now. We'll give more updates as they come as far as timelines. But if God's tugging your heart to be a part of church planting some way, somehow, keep praying about that, because things are happening.